If there's one thing that makes the whole X-Men universe so enjoyable, it has to be how vast it is. There are so many heroes with different powers already. Then you can add the new generations of students with cooler powers who are being trained on top of that. And then still, you have so many villains of the X-Men universe who eventually decided that they no longer wanted to be evil. With this many characters, it is really hard to have just one group that leads the missions. And that's how we ended up with X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue. Two teams with one goal, saving the innocent. In this video, we will learn everything there is about these two teams, so if you're curious, stick around. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. How the X-Men divided into two parts. The story starts in Volume 2 of X-Men. By this time, the X-Men had reached the peak of its popularity and the stress was on to ensure that the new volume of X-Men could carry forward the legacy of its previous volumes. The first issue begins with spaceships traversing across the vast expanse of space. It is clear that they are looking for someone in particular, but who could it be? There is no time to answer that question because bam, one of the spaceships gets lost. The leader of the troop barks command at the surviving members when a huge flash of bright light blinds them. Before they can understand what is happening, their ship gets broken into several pieces. All the members are floating about in space, and there is one man standing tall. Clearly, he is the one who is behind this situation. Who is he? None other than Magneto. Magneto has made a home in space, and these people had barged in on his territory. Magneto had no interest in what anyone did on the surface of Earth. He had lost his interest a long time ago. All he wanted was to be left alone, so he was going to send those people back to Earth, albeit violently. But before he could do so, the main guy of the troops admitted that they did not want to go back. They had come so far because of Magneto. They were in fact searching for him. These people are not normal humans, they are mutants, and they are in desperate need of Magneto's help. They needed his help so desperately that they hijacked the Soviet shuttle and chased after Magneto's last known whereabouts. The energy blast that Magneto released to destroy them was noticed by the people of Earth who were keeping a close eye on the Americans. The energy signature was unmistakably Magneto's. Everyone in the government knew that Magneto's asteroid M was destroyed, but it won't be surprising if he created another one, right? So with the energy signature being this prevalent, it was imperative that both Washington and Moscow were notified about this development, especially after the terrorists hijacked a Soviet shuttle to meet up with him. With the threat of Magneto looming over their heads as well as a very toxic Soviet-American relationship, the government decided to go ahead with the Magneto Protocol. But who on this Earth is powerful enough to stop Magneto? Why, the X-Men, of course. The X-Mansion was rebuilt, and after all the things that the X-Men went through in Volume 1, their numbers had significantly increased. There were 14 people who now shared the title of X-Men, and Professor Xavier wanted to make sure everyone was well trained for whatever threat might come their way. Once the X-Men passed their training sessions of infiltrating the mansion and capturing Professor Xavier with flying colors, they were all called into a meeting led by none other than the man, the myth, the legend himself, Nick Fury. Nick Fury came bearing awful news. Maybe the asteroid M was not at all destroyed and merely cloaked, right out of sight. Not only that, the assumed place of this asteroid is right over Eurasia, and the Soviets were not too happy about it. Thankfully, they have not reacted to the threat just yet, owing to their pledge to not act unless provoked. But everyone knew that the Soviets had a threshold as thick as a hair. Hearing the threat at hand, Xavier decided it would be best for the X-Men to start their move right away. He decided to listen to Cyclops' suggestion and split the group into two. Cyclops was the leader of the blue team and Storm was the leader of the gold team. The colors were echoes of X-Men's initial colors and was a way of signifying that despite being divided into two teams, they were at the end of the day one unified group. The breaking down of X-Men into two teams gave more flexibility when it came to planning out attacks, which is what Xavier was counting on. Magneto, on the other hand, was already on the move. He showed up in the mid-Atlantic, and obviously, his ominous entrance was threatening enough that the Soviets launched a ballistic missile directed his way. Magneto was undeterred. He easily deflected the missile and, to a point, sank the vessel that fired the missile. The gold team approached Magneto and Rogue tried to talk some sense into Magneto, but Magneto was not willing to listen to anything she had to say. He noticed the X-Jet making a beeline towards him and attacked the jet as well, forcing the blue team to get out and start fighting for their lives. In the midst of the flight, Magneto Magneto seemed to dissociate for a second, he thought about the people he had just killed as men, and that struck him as odd. It made him feel like peace was never something he could do. Wherever he went, he brought destruction with him, even if he tried his best to follow Xavier's peaceful approach. Rage overtook that dissociation, and Magneto fired one of his many upper atmospheric nuclear missiles, proving a point that he was not going to let anyone get the best of him. Everyone managed to move out of the way of the blast except Rogue, who had followed after Magneto, hoping to talk some sense into him. But once the smoke cleared, we realized the gravity of the situation. Magneto had escaped with the nuclear missiles hidden in the mid-Atlantic. Rogue was shot at by a Russian aircraft, and while we all assumed she was hurt, in reality she ended up in Genosha, the island nation that Magneto had built to keep mutants safe. The mutants who had shown up at his doorstep, now going by the name of Acolytes, were led by Fabian Cortez. This man is the one who managed to lower Magneto's guards and insists that he get involved with the whole humans versus mutants argument once again. Obviously, Fabian Cortez had his own agenda, but he made it seem like he was doing it all because he was a huge fan of Magneto and felt like he was the messiah that the mutants needed. Thanks to all that, Magneto started a full-fledged war with the X-Men. The blue team was the one to intercept him, and the fight was brutal. The city front where they fought was almost turned to dust. The outcome of this fight was not favorable at all. The blue team faced defeat at the hands of Magneto, and they were captured by him. Xavier had no choice but to start mobilizing the gold team as well. In Volume 11, Xavier finds himself a really good ally in Muir Island, Miss Moira McTaggart. He thought that perhaps reaching out to her would be helpful enough, but right before he could establish contact with her, Magneto kidnaps them both. This is where we learn of the horrifying truth. So, Fabian Cortez is a mutant who has the power to increase other mutants' powers. He was doing that on Magneto to ensure that he had enough power to carry on his Messiah tasks. Now, while doing those power-ups by altering his DNA, Fabian noticed that there was something strange about Magneto's DNA, something that was definitely not natural. When he pointed that out, Magneto remembered the time he was turned into an infant during a clash with another mutant. Once he was turned into an infant, Xavier took him to Muir Island and left him in Moira's supervision. Magneto would not have returned to his prime without the help of a Shi'ar agent who blasted him with the powers. Obviously, the Shi'ar energy blast did not change his DNA matrix. That simply grew him up. So it must have been Moira who messed around with his DNA matrix, and what do you know? He was right. Moira had a son who was rather unstable, so she thought if she could manipulate Magneto's DNA matrix and eliminate the instability in his central nervous system, she would be able to do the same to her son if the method was proven to be successful. She played God with an infant soul. Sadly, that infant is Magneto, who did not take this type of alteration to his DNA sequence very kindly. He started doubting his own actions, and he was super agitated by it. I can't really blame him for that, though. He put a mental sheath in Moira's body, acting like her second skin. Then he forced her to brainwash the blue team into becoming his acolytes, crippling the X-Men team for good. Nick Fury, who had no idea about these things, had another terrible news to add to the bunch. The US and Russian governments both have decided that it was imperative to neutralize the threat that Magneto posed, and so they were going to fire a plasma cannon at Asteroid M. This would definitely take down Magneto, but it would also take down the X-Men team as well as the Professor, who was currently stuck there. So the X-Men Gold team decided to go ahead with their move. They got into an undetectable spaceship and landed on Asteroid M. On arriving there, they are shocked to see their teammates being aligned with Magneto's goons. Luckily for them, Xavier noticed that the blue team, while brainwashed to their core, were starting to break free from the brainwashing slowly. As Psylocke was trying to outmaneuver Iceman, her psychic powers triggered something in Iceman's brain. This led to a mass psychic outbreak, which brought all the X-Men out of their brainwashing. Realizing their friends were back, the Gold team informed the blue team about the dire situation they were in with no time to waste. They started their evacuation. Xavier, being the kind soul that he is, did not want to leave Magneto behind, who seemed to be in a lot of pain. This is where we realize just what a conniving man Fabian is. Fabian was not actually curing Magneto, he was simply boosting Magneto's powers to make him feel better. When he realized that the X-Men were there, Fabian escaped using an escape pod, making it very clear that he was using Magneto to fuel his own agenda. By painting Magneto as a martyr who fell victim to human atrocities, Fabian would be able to score a lot of points amongst the mutants and lead his very own anti-human team. But there was no time to fix his error. The plasma cannon was going to go off any second, and the X-Men had to evacuate. The first wave of acolytes and Magneto remained on Asteroid M and refused to leave, standing proud proud and tall as Asteroid M went up in flames. Charles could do nothing but stare as his old friend was destroyed in front of his own very eyes. With such a heart-wrenching story, the writers introduced us to the blue and gold teams of the X-Men for the first time. No wonder they became so popular as they did. And now that we have their making covered, let's get into the nitty-gritty about each team. Members and adventures of X-Men Blue. Now the question is, who were the Blue team members? Well, I did mention that the leader was Cyclops, but I never did went into the details for the rest. Let me break it down for you. So in the Blue team, under Cyclops' watchful eyes, we have Wolverine, Psylocke, Rogue, Gambit, and Beast. This is a very interesting group in my eyes because you have the most brawn, Wolverine with his rage, and most brains, Cyclops' tactics and Beast's knowledge of science in one team. While their first ever mission rendered them brainwashed and helpless, their other adventures were not quite like that. After this mission, the Blue Squad was sent to deal with the Omega Red conflict. Omega Red was a Soviet super soldier who attacked the X-Mansion, hoping to capture Wolverine because, of course, he has to be the center of all controversies. Omega Red managed to succeed in this mission, and following this kidnapping, the Blue team were sent forward to save Wolverine. Jubilee decided to join the Blue Squad to make up for the teammates' loss, and they managed to start moving out. Then we find out that Omega Red was also sent for someone else. His other target was Psylocke. Matsuo Surayaba wanted to control Psylocke and use her for his benefit. When Omega Red captured her as well, Psylocke did a big brain move and pretended to be under Han's brainwashing to figure out what exactly was happening. It was not evident that her allegiance still lay with the X-Men, so she managed to remain undetected as she made her moves. Eventually, other members of Team X, as in Wolverine's original team, before the X-Men decided to have their part to play in the conflict. With Maverick, Sabretooth, the Hand, and everyone else joining hands against them, the X-Men were having a really bad time. This is when they found a rather surprising ally in Omega Red himself. Omega Red went through a change of heart, which is a whole story on its own, and decided to help the X-Men save their friend. Psylocke waited for the right moment to reveal her true allegiance, and when she did, she managed to save Wolverine and her team. Together, the X-Men Blue Squad came home victorious. But they weren't left out work for long. Gambit, who recently joined the X-Men, had a wife, Belladonna. Belladonna wanted Gambit to help her resolve the conflict that was happening in New Orleans. The two parties in this conflict were the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild. So obviously, she approached the right people for this problem. Now, by this time, there was a nice romance blossoming between Gambit and Rogue, which was shaken to its core thanks to Belladonna showing up. Talk about drama. However, putting the relationship drama aside, as the X-Men investigate the matter, they learn that the real culprit who was causing all of this issue was none other than Brood. They reached out to the Ghost Rider for help, and thanks to the spirit of vengeance, the problem was solved. Let's talk about another instance. Mojo World is the world where Shatterstar is from. Given the relationship Shatterstar has with the X-Men, it does not surprise anyone that people from Mojo World decided to contact the X-Men for their problems. There was a rebellion taking place in Mojo World. The people at Mojo World decided that they wouldn't be enough to stop this rebellion and dethrone Mojo, the evil tyrant. So, Longshot, Lila, Cheney, and Dazzler reached out to the Blue team for help. However, the Blue team did not expect Mojo to be as powerful as he turned out to be. He captured them at a moment's notice and forced them to act on the television for his amusement. He even tortured Professor X just to prove his point in case the X-Men decided to go against him. Needless to say, the situation was dire. The rebels of Mojo World pulled through a critical moment, and together the X-Men and the people of Mojo World defeated Mojo for good. While the Blue team had their own adventures, it does not mean that the Gold team were sitting ducks. Let's now learn about the Gold team. Members and adventures of X-Men Gold. As for the Gold members, they were under the leadership of Storm. This group had members like Jean Grey, Colossus, Iceman, and Archangel. Whenever Forge was around, he would join his team. Eventually, after her marriage, Jean Grey left his group, but that empty space was soon made up by Bishop. While the Blue team was out and about dealing with all of these issues, the Gold team was tasked with a separate issue. They had to go and attend a party. I know you're thinking, why is this party a dangerous task, right? Well, other than being every introvert's nightmare, this party was at the Hellfire Club, which is, not a very safe place for the X-Men. The X-Men were asked to attend by Emma Frost, who recently thwarted an assassination attempt. Not only that, but she also noticed various club members were being targeted, so to ensure everyone's safety, she thought it would be better to get the X-Men involved. Soon enough, her fears came to fruition. Trevor Fitzroy, a mutant from the future, started attacking the Hellions and Emma Frost. On top of launching attacks, he sent Sentinels after Donald Pierce in Australia Australia. Pierce forced the gateway to teleport him away from that location, but the Sentinels followed him through the portal and landed up in this party. This attack of the Sentinels caused the murder of Frost, the Hellions, Pierce, and Jean Grey. But wait, how can they die so easily? After all, they're not Uncle Ben. This is when Professor X realized that Jean's consciousness had been relocated to Emma's body. So, yay, she was alive, and not only that, she was captured by Fitzroy and his people. Turns out Fitzroy and Shiboni Shaw were competing in a murder run, a twisted game devised by the Game Master. When the time was right, Jean managed to surprise her captors and fled with her friends. Fitzroy realized he needed more backup, so he opened up the portal to bring in allies from the future. But instead of allies, Bishop showed up, which led to a huge fight between him and Bishop. While Fitzroy's followers escaped, the X-Men survived and Bishop was on the loose. On their way back, the Gold Team came across an extra-dimensional rift in the North Pacific. As they investigated it, they found Colossus's older brother, Mikhail. Now, while it is great news that Colossus had found his long-lost brother, it would be stupid to leave the rift open. So, with Sunfire and Mikhail's help, the X-Men managed to close the portal and come back to the X-Mansion. Once home, they started focusing on Bishop, who had left a path of destruction in his wake while he tried to bait Fitzroy out of his hiding place. Eventually, the Gold Team managed to find Bishop and intercept him. The fight between them was chaotic, to say the least, but they managed to bring him back. Once at X-Mansion, much to everyone's surprise, Charles made Bishop an X-Man. As a new team member, Bishop told the X-Men that they would soon be betrayed by one of their own. Soon after this revelation, we learn of the Morlocks versus Callisto conflict. Heavily injured from the attacks, Callisto sought refuge at the X-Mansion. To stop the Morlocks from going out there and wrecking havoc, the Gold Team blocked off the Morlock tunnels. But in the midst of this, Mikhail joined forces with Callisto, injured Iceman, and took the Morlocks with him to another dimension after flooding the tunnels. The last mission of X-Men Blue and Gold. Despite the initial splitting of the original X-Men team, eventually these two teams came together, especially during the Legacy virus story arc. Professor X was shocked by Cable, who was infected by the techno-organic virus. While this was happening, Cyclops and Jean were abducted by the Horsemen of Apocalypse. They were taken to Apocalypse, who was actually Mr. Sinister himself. He hands them over to the Mutant Liberation Front in exchange for a mysterious container. Seeing how tumultuous the situation was, the blue team of X-Men joined X-Factor to arrest X-Force, which was Cable's team. This is where we learned that this whole thing was orchestrated by MLF's leader, Strife, who is Cable's longtime enemy. He impersonated Cable to launch an attack on Professor X and make the X-Men take down X-Force for good. His big brain move definitely deserves a round of applause. But what he did not take into account was for the real Cable to show up. Cable managed to prove his innocence to Wolverine and Bishop and joined hands with them. Now, while this was happening here, the Gold Team was tasked to find a couple. The Gold Team came across Apocalypse, the real one, but told him that Strife had defeated him. So the X-Men and Apocalypse joins hands to take down Strife and save Xavier's life, because the techno-organic virus that Charles was infected with was created by Apocalypse himself. Jean sent a telepathic message to Wolverine, and he followed that with a team to find Strife's moon base. Cyclops and Jean were rescued, and this is where we get the family reunion of the century. Cable is Madeline and Cyclops' son from the future, but before the family could hang around for a more chit-chat, Cable disappeared with Strife, and Mr. Sinister opened the container, releasing the Legacy virus for good. After the fight with Strife, Colossus's family in Russia was being targeted by the government because they wanted his baby sister to destroy the Soul Skinner. Colossus could not save his parents, but he managed to save his sister with the help of the X-Men Blue Team. While living in the X-Mansion, it was found out that Illyana had the terminal Legacy virus, which was extremely heartbreaking. During this time, the X-Men Blue and Gold Team started working together quite a bit. They had to work together over time when Magneto came back into the picture. Fabian Cortez, the man who had escaped hoping to use Magneto's death for his own benefit, had garnered quite the fan following, and then right when they reached the peak of their fame, Magneto showed up with his own acolytes. Magneto prepared to wage an all-out war when he learned that to combat his powers, the whole Earth's electromagnetic field would need to be changed. So to prevent Magneto from killing several innocent lives, the Gold Team and Blue Team dissolved into one X-Men team for better cohesiveness of work. Despite that, sometimes they would use those blue and gold naming structures to refer to themselves. Forging a new legacy, the X-Men Blue Team redefined. After quite a few years, we saw the split of blue and gold happening again, this time when a teenage version of Jean Grey and the original X-Men got trapped in the present day. Due to some unsupervised time traveling, there was a splitting in the group. The ones trapped in the present time became the X-Men Blue Team. This team faced off against Ahab, Bastion, Miss Sinister, and even the White Queen. They also had run-ins with the New Marauders and the Hexmen, who were basically the villainous versions of the X-Men from alternate realities. At one point, this team joined hands with Venom to fight off a group of symbiotes known as the Poisons. But that is not all. At one point, this group had Magneto as a team member, along with the mutants from other realities like Jimmy Hudson and Bloodstorm. Even Polaris, Daken, and Zorn, along with Gazing Nightshade, joined this blue team. Gold Reforged. The X-Men Gold team rises to new challenges. Thanks to the breakup I mentioned before, there was a Gold team present as well. This Gold team was led by Kitty Pryde, who at the time was leading Xavier's school. She brought back the original X-Men like Storm, Colossus, and Nightcrawler. Even Old Man Logan eventually joined the Gold team. She also included Ascani, aka Rachel Gray, in this team. This team specifically operated out of Xavier's school and became a huge group with new students joining the team. The new generation of X-Men like Magic, Magma, Rogue, Armor, Ink, Hijack, and Pyro became a part of this group. As for villains, this group faced they had quite an interesting roster. This Gold team proudly boasted facing off against a new Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. They also went up against the Anti-Mutant Heritage Initiative led by Lydia Nance. The Gold team eventually were trapped in the negative zone, but when they came out of it, they faced off against an advanced Sentinel called Alpha, and even had a few bouts of fight with Mesmero, who took over Rachel's mind. The Gold and Blue teams worked separately until the time-traveling X-Men came home. That dissolved away the Blue team, but despite the dissolution, there is no doubt that their legacy lives on. Marvel's verdict. The X-Men is a group of heroes that boasts a rich legacy and history of its own. The Gold and Blue strike teams are one of the many facets that the X-Men has had over the years. These two groups shall remain one of the few major groups of the X-Men for years to come, owing to just how cool their dynamics and their adventures were. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.